She asked for help with trembling hands. He never expected that saying, "Don't worry about the money," would bring him face to face with a secret he wasn't ready for. The afternoon sun was beginning to soften, spreading a golden glow across the nearly empty road. Daniel wiped the grease from his hands with an old rag, sighing as he looked around his quiet mechanic shop. Work had been too slow. Some days he wondered how long he could keep the doors open with just a trickle of customers. Then, faintly, he heard the uneven hum of an engine. He glanced toward the street just in time to see a silver sedan gliding awkwardly into the lot. The car rolled to a shaky stop, the engine coughing before cutting off completely. Daniel raised his eyebrows. It wasn't an old wreck. The body was clean, modern, but something inside wasn't right. The driver's door opened and a young woman stepped out. Her blouse and jeans looked neat but travel-worn, a light jacket draped over her shoulders. Her hair, slightly tousled by the breeze, framed a face caught between grace and exhaustion. She tried to mask it, but Daniel saw her hands tremble as she gripped the car door. "Hi," she said softly, walking closer. I don't know what's wrong. It just kept shutting off on me." Daniel gave her a reassuring nod. "Don't worry. Let's see what we're dealing with." She moved quickly to pop the hood, standing off to the side while Daniel leaned in. The engine bay looked tidy, but his practiced eyes found the problem almost instantly. A loose connector interfering with ignition. A simple fix. "You're in luck," he said, tightening the part with a small twist of his tool. "Nothing serious." The woman's shoulders slumped as if a weight had lifted. Still, she didn't relax fully. She clutched her purse close, shifting nervously from one foot to the other. Daniel noticed the way she kept her eyes low, as if avoiding his gaze. With a final tug, he lowered the hood. "All done," he said with quiet certainty. "She run fine now." The woman gave a faint smile. Then she opened her purse, pulling out a thin wallet. A few bills peeked out barely enough for groceries. Her hands trembled again as she held them toward him. "I don't have much," she whispered. "But please, I want to pay you something." Daniel looked at her closely. The unease in her voice wasn't just about the car. This was deeper pride, fear, maybe even desperation. He shook his head gently, pushing her hand back without touching the money. "Don't worry about it," he said firmly but kindly. "It's on the house." Her eyes widened. For a second, it seemed as though she might cry, but instead she whispered, "Thank you," almost too quietly to hear. She returned to her car, her hands still trembling as she gripped the wheel. The engine purred smoothly this time, and she pulled onto the road, disappearing into the fading light. Daniel watched until she was gone. Something in his chest tightened, though he couldn't explain why. He thought it was just another good deed, just another small kindness. But it wasn't. It was the beginning of something far larger than he could imagine. That night, Daniel sat alone in his workshop. The shop lights glowed dimly, casting long shadows over the scattered tools and oil-stained floor. He had fixed plenty of cars before, but something about the encounter with the trembling young woman lingered in his mind. He replayed the moment she offered him the money, the way her hands shook as though she was holding more than just cash, like she was holding the fragile dignity of someone trying not to fall apart. He wondered if she was safe, if her car had carried her home without trouble. Daniel shook his head and tried to laugh at himself. "Since when do I sit around worrying about strangers?" he muttered, running a hand through his messy hair. But the truth was, loneliness had a way of making every small connection feel larger than life. The next morning, the shop was silent again. He made coffee, unlocked the front doors, and waited. By noon, not a single customer had come. Bills sat on his desk like a silent accusation. The rent, the electricity, the suppliers, it was all piling up. Daniel was kind by nature, but kindness didn't pay the landlord. He was still staring at the numbers when a sound caught his ear, tires crunching against gravel. He glanced up. A car pulled in. Not the silver sedan from yesterday, but a black SUV, gleaming like it had just left the showroom. Then another vehicle followed, a red coupe. Then a third. Within minutes, the lot outside his modest shop was filling with cars. Not the usual kind, either luxury machines, the type that only appeared in magazines and commercials. Engines purred, doors opened, and sharply dressed men and women stepped out one by one. Daniel's jaw tightened. "What on earth?" he whispered. At the front of the group stood the same young woman from yesterday. No longer trembling, no longer hesitant. She walked toward him with steady steps, her eyes calm and confident. The simple jacket and travel-worn look were gone. Today, she carried herself with quiet authority, like someone used to being in control. Daniel wiped his hands on a rag, confused but composed. "You again," he said. "Did the car give you trouble after all?" She shook her head. "No, it runs perfectly." "Then, what's all this?" He gestured toward the fleet of cars, and people now gathered around. The woman took a breath, her expression unreadable. "You told me not to worry about the money." Daniel nodded slowly. "I meant it." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Good, because yesterday wasn't just about fixing a car. It was a test." Daniel froze. "A test?" She glanced back at the people behind her. Some were watching intently, others whispering among themselves. Then she turned to Daniel again. "Kindness is rare," she said softly, "and we wanted to see if you had it when no one was watching." Daniel felt the ground shift beneath him. He had no idea what kind of storm he had just stepped into. And yet, in the quiet between her words, something told him his life was never going to be the same again. Daniel stood frozen, the rag clenched in his hand. The young woman's words echoed in his ears. It was a test. He had fixed plenty of cars, met plenty of customers, but nothing like this. The woman stepped closer, her confidence steady now. "My name is Elena," she said. "And these people?" She gestured toward the well-dressed group by the luxury cars. "Are part of something bigger. We call it the charity test." Daniel blinked, unsure whether to laugh or demand an explanation. "Charity test?" "Yes," Elena replied. "We go into the world looking for people who help without expecting anything in return. Yesterday, you could have taken my last money, but you didn't. You gave me something more valuable, dignity." The others nodded as if they already knew the story. Some smiled, others simply observed. Their polished shoes and tailored suits looked out of place against the cracked concrete of Daniel's workshop. Daniel shook his head slowly. "Listen, I don't know what kind of game this is, but I don't need recognition. I just did what felt right." "That's exactly why you were chosen," Elena said quietly. Daniel frowned. "Chosen for what?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned to one of the men, who carried a leather case. He opened it to reveal neat stacks of documents, along with a set of car keys glinting in the light. Daniel's eyes widened. "What is this?" he asked. "A chance," Elena said. "We invest in people who pass the test. Some receive help for their families. Others get businesses funded. Some are simply given the means to live without fear. For you, it can be whatever you need most." The rag slipped from Daniel's fingers. He took a step back, shaking his head. "No, this can't be real. Yesterday, you looked broke, desperate. And now you're standing here offering me what? A fortune?" Elena's expression softened. "I wasn't pretending about the struggle. I've been there too. That's why I'm part of this now. We help the kind-hearted because we know what it's like to have nothing." Daniel's mind spun. The quiet shop, the unpaid bills, the empty fridge back home, they all flashed before him. This was everything he had ever prayed for. landing on his doorstep in the strangest way. But a small, stubborn voice inside him whispered caution. Nothing came without strings. "What's the catch?" he asked finally, his voice low. Elena met his eyes without flinching. "There's no catch. Only responsibility. If you accept this, you agreed to use it the same way you used your kindness yesterday. Not for greed, but for good." Daniel's heart pounded. Around him, the luxury cars gleamed under the sunlight, a surreal contrast to the rusted tools and faded walls of his shop. This moment felt bigger than him, bigger than anything he had ever known. He took a deep breath, unsure whether he was standing on the edge of a blessing or a trap disguised as one. The choice was his. The shop felt smaller than ever, its cracked walls closing in around Daniel as the group waited for his answer. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lot, gleaming off the luxury cars like silent reminders of the wealth he had never touched. Daniel's throat felt dry. He rubbed his palms together, trying to ground himself. "So let me get this straight," he said finally. "You're offering to change my life just because I didn't take your money yesterday?" Elena nodded. "Because you chose kindness when it cost you something." Her calm tone unsettled him more than if she had shouted. He thought of his bills stacked on the desk, the empty pantry at home, the nights he skipped meals so his younger brother could eat. A voice inside him urged, "Say yes. Take it. This is your chance." But another voice whispered, "Things too good to be true usually are." Daniel glanced at the people behind her. Their polished appearances, their watchful eyes, it didn't feel like generosity alone. It felt like judgment. He hated being judged. "What if I say no?" Daniel asked, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. Elena didn't flinch. "Then nothing changes. You go back to your life. No punishment, no reward. Just the same as yesterday." The simplicity of her answer rattled him. No threats, no pressure. Just choice. Daniel paced a few steps, then stopped at the hood of a customer's old truck. He placed his hand on the rusted metal, grounding himself in the familiar. Grease and grit his world, his reality. He looked back at Elena. "And if I say yes?" Her eyes softened. "Then doors open. More than you can imagine. But remember, kindness isn't a one-time act. If you accept, it becomes your responsibility. Not just money. Not just comfort. Responsibility." Daniel closed his eyes. He pictured his brother's hopeful face, his mother's framed photograph on the wall at home, the gnawing hunger that had become his shadow. When he opened his eyes, they burned with a quiet fire. "I'll take it," he said. Elena exhaled slowly, as though she had been holding her breath for hours. The others exchanged glances, some satisfied, some unreadable. One of the men stepped forward, handing Daniel the leather case. The weight of it pressed into his hands documents, keys, and something more intangible. Possibility. Daniel's heart raced as he flipped the case open. A new set of business licenses. A partnership offer with one of the city's largest garages. A bank card that carried more security than he had ever known. He looked up, stunned. "Why me?" he whispered. Elena smiled faintly. "Because you proved that even in hunger, you had room to give." For the first time in years, Daniel felt a spark of hope light inside him. He didn't know if he had just made the best choice of his life, or the one that would cost him everything. But one thing was certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. Daniel stood in the middle of his workshop, the leather case heavy in his hands. Around him, the group began to disperse. Some returned to their sleek cars. Others lingered near Elena, speaking in low tones. The scene felt surreal, like a dream that could vanish with one blink. Elena stayed behind, watching Daniel carefully. "This is only the beginning," she said. "What you do next is up to you." Daniel nodded slowly, still overwhelmed. I don't even know where to start. She gave a small smile. Start the way you did yesterday. With kindness. That's all. With that, she turned and walked toward her sedan. The others followed, engines humming to life one by one, until the lot that had seemed impossibly full just minutes ago was empty again. Silence settled over the shop, broken only by the ticking of a cooling engine nearby. Daniel sank onto a stool, his heart pounding. He opened the case again, staring at the papers and the bank card. It didn't feel real. He half expected to wake up hungry in his tiny apartment, his brother nudging him for breakfast that wasn't there. But when he slipped the card into his pocket, its weight reminded him this was no dream. The next morning, Daniel didn't go to the bank. He didn't call the number on the papers. Instead, he opened the shop early, as he always did. By mid-morning, a familiar sound reached him, the rattle of an old engine. An elderly man pulled in, his car coughing with every turn of the wheel. The man stepped out, embarrassed. Son, I don't have much, but if you could just make it run another week, I'd be grateful. Daniel studied him. The man's shoes were worn, his jacket frayed. He saw his own reflection in those tired eyes, the same desperation, the same quiet pride. Without a word, Daniel grabbed his tools and got to work. It took an hour, but soon the car purred more smoothly. When the man reached for his wallet, Daniel shook his head. No charge, he said gently. Just take care of yourself. The old man's eyes filled with tears. He tried to protest, but Daniel cut him off with a smile. Trust me, it's on the house. As the car drove away, Daniel stood in the doorway of his shop. The sun broke through the clouds, warming his face. For the first time in years, he felt not just the relief of having something, but the joy of being able to give. That evening, a letter arrived. No name, no return address, just a single sentence on thick paper. You passed. Daniel folded the letter slowly, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. The money, the opportunities, even the leather case, they were tools. But the real gift was something greater. The chance to live with purpose, to carry forward the same kindness that had saved him once. And as the lights of the city flickered in the distance, Daniel knew this wasn't the end of the test. It was only the beginning.